Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be making some comments from Zechariah chapter 14. People think that it's about the second coming of Jesus Christ, but it's really not. It's limited to an Old Testament context where even at the end of the chapter, guess what is still in effect? The law of Moses. A lot of people get confused where they understand it's not about the second coming, but they think it's about 70 AD when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. But it's not, because what's in effect at the end of the chapter? The law of Moses. And so what we learn, Zechariah chapter 14 is a picture of promise for God's faithful people, that even if Jerusalem was destroyed, the entire city would not be destroyed. God would save the faithful in the city. They would not be taken out of the city like what we've seen occur in 70 AD, but also the wicked would be destroyed, and then God would come. It's a picture. He would come and fight against the nations that were gathered together to fight against Jerusalem. This is limited to an Old Testament context. As stated at the end of the chapter, guess what is still standing? The temple. Guess what is still in effect? The law of Moses. And so it cannot be about the second coming of Jesus Christ. I just want to point out and take note that this is not about 70 AD, because it says in Zechariah chapter 14 verse 2, God will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. And so some individuals say, look, that's 70 AD when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. And those who say that this is 70 AD oftentimes believe that a coming of Christ is mentioned in the New Testament against Jerusalem. But if you read verse 3, it says, then shall the Lord go forth. So there is the coming of Christ, or of the Lord, and it says, and fight against those nations. Zechariah 14 pictures God saving Jerusalem and fighting against the Gentile nations that came against Jerusalem. So it's not about 70 AD. It's not about the end of the world, because what you actually come to see in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 11, it says, men will dwell in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. So that tells us it's not about the second coming, because Jerusalem, along with the rest of the earth, is going to be destroyed at the second coming of Jesus Christ. And it's not about any time period in our future before the world ends, because it tells us in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 16, it shall come to pass, everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. That shows the Old Testament law was still in effect. Verse 17, it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. Why would they go to Jerusalem once a year, year to year? Well, to keep the Old Testament festivals. Zechariah 14 is a picture of God saving the righteous. All the earth is pictured as coming together to fight against Jerusalem, and God is pictured as not only first destroying the wicked among Jerusalem, but afterwards destroying all the wicked among the Gentile nations. And so Zechariah 14 is a picture of universal Old Testament proselytization, a picture of Old Testament universal conversion to the law of Moses. You read in verse 18, and if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite the Gentiles that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. The Old Testament law is not in effect today. The Old Testament law will never again be in effect. It was nailed to the cross of Christ. We are under a new law. We are given new commandments. We're given new instructions. Verse 19 says, this shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. It's a picture of universal proselytization to the Jewish nation. Verse 20, look what it says. In that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. It pictures the temple, the house of the Lord, still standing. The house of the Lord, a reference to the Jewish temple, was not standing in 70 AD. It's surely not standing today. And it's not going to be built again, in which individuals are hoping for. Individuals are hoping that the Jews regain the territory that the Muslims now have, and they are expecting and promoting and wanting a war to break out between the Jews and the Muslims, so that way the Jews can have territory to build a third temple. The Jews are disobedient. So are the Muslims. But the Jews are disobedient. Why would you care about them regaining that territory? Is it going to draw them closer to God? No, it's not. They reject Jesus Christ. Zechariah chapter 14 is not about 70 AD. It's not about the second coming. It is a picture of promise under the Old Testament of protection for God's Old Testament people. And it's a picture that as long as God's Old Testament people stayed faithful, any nation who came against them, though at the current time they were rebelling against God, that nation, after being punished, is pictured as submitting themselves to the God of Israel. Now, there are Old Testament promises to the nation of Israel that are pictured as forever and ever, but that's only until their law ended at the cross of Christ. Once the new law came into effect, those Old Testament promises, including the land promise, came to an end. If you believe in Jesus Christ and you are expecting his second coming, the day in which he will judge the living and the dead, raise the dead, that they might inherit eternal life and live forever, and those who are living will also receive new bodies. If you're looking forward to that, leave a comment below. If you have any questions about Zechariah chapter 14 and are having trouble understanding it, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you, whether you agree or disagree. What are your thoughts about the second coming of Jesus? And what are your thoughts about Zechariah chapter 14? God bless you. Have a nice day.